I am often told that I am a man who knows how to think, and yet I spent most of my 20s as a Marxist. The attraction was simple, a lack of any other competing explanation for the profound disparities I saw in the world around me. As a high school dropout at age 16, I worked full-time as a Western Union messenger in the Chelsea district of Manhattan. At the end of the day, when I was feeling reckless, I would take the Fifth Avenue bus for 15 cents. That bus took me up through the glamorous parts of Fifth Avenue, past the great stores and the Empire State Building, and up past Carnegie Hall and Riverside Drive, filled with wonderful luxury apartment buildings. But then, finally, around 129th or 130th Street, the bus would turn back into the occupied area, and there you'd see the tenements. I would look at this chasm and wonder, why is this? Why this huge disparity? And there was nothing out there, no other theory, other than the Marxist explanation that the rich had gotten rich by taking from the poor. It was working in government that changed my mind. I began to realize that the government is not simply the personification of the general will, as Rousseau or others suggested. Government institutions have their own institutional interests. My first professional job was a summer internship at the U.S. Department of Labor. I was assigned to study minimum wages in Puerto Rico. I was a big supporter of minimum wage laws, but I also knew the argument that these laws simply price low-wage workers out of a job. As I looked at the numbers, I saw what the economists predicted. As they would jack up the minimum wage, the number of jobs would go down. The official explanation, however, was that hurricanes destroyed the sugar crop, so fewer workers were needed. I had been taught at Chicago that if there are two competing theories, there should be empirical evidence that could distinguish what would happen under one theory from what would happen under the other. So one morning I came in and said, "I got it. We need our data on the amount of sugarcane standing in the fields before the hurricane struck." I waited for the congratulations, but instead I could see stricken looks around the room, as if this guy had stumbled on something that would ruin them all. They told me they didn't have those data, and that getting them would require an official request going up the chain of command to the Secretary of Labor, then to the Secretary of Agriculture, and back down again. I submitted my request to the Secretary of Labor, and I am still patiently awaiting the reply. The institutional fear of that number was what mattered. The U.S. Department of Labor administers the minimum wage law, and the careers of perhaps a third of its staff rely on that law. The law itself requires the Labor Department to study the employment effects of minimum wages, and those studies are absolutely a farce. It became clear to me that the government was not seeking the national interest, it was protecting its own. This experience led me to understand the conflict of visions. I lay out two competing ways of looking at life. The unconstrained vision, which Rousseau famously expressed when he said, "Man is born free, but everywhere in chains," sees the fundamental problem not as human nature, but as institutions. It believes that if we just reform our institutions, we can solve bad things. They don't understand that good things don't happen automatically. My own view is the constrained vision, which sees the evils of the world as deriving from the limited and unhappy choices available, given the inherent moral and intellectual limitations of human beings. For the constrained vision, we rely on certain social processes, such as moral traditions, the marketplace, or families, not government. We rely on these processes because the government uses surrogate decision-makers, and they cannot possibly know as much as the millions of individuals whose personal decisions have been preempted. If we look at the evidence, the unconstrained vision has been disastrous. The grand myth is that black economic progress began with the civil rights laws and the war on poverty programs of the 1960s. The fact is, the poverty rate among blacks fell from 87% in 1940 to 47% in 1960. The progress after the Great Society was just the continuation of a previous economic trend, but at a slower rate. It was not some grand deliverance. If you want to be serious about evidence, compare where blacks stood 100 years after the end of slavery with where they stood after 30 years of the liberal welfare state. The result is social regression. Most black children were being raised in two-parent families in 1960. 30 years later, the great majority were being raised by single parents. My friend Pat Moynihan was alarmed when the illegitimacy rate among black families was 25% in 1965. Today, it is over 70%, and it is dramatically worse for all groups. The welfare state is to blame. You are creating a situation where the government is paying people not to get married, where if the man stays, the government won't give the woman benefits, but if he leaves, it will. This is not just an American phenomenon. We see the dissolution of the family structure in Britain, France, and Norway. In Iceland, 2 out of 3 children are raised in a single-parent home. Compare that to South Korea, where it is 1 out of 66. When you pay people not to do something, more people don't do it. This led to rising crime rates on both sides of the Atlantic. I remember sleeping out on the fire escapes in Harlem on hot summer nights, a commonplace thing then. Decades later, when I mentioned walking my dog in the local park, the students looked like I was a man from Mars. Nobody in their right mind would let a child go into that park. It was a different world. People were fundamentally decent and improving their lot until the government decided to help them. The argument for reparations is another outgrowth of this unconstrained vision that avoids facts. It would be nice to know the evidence for what is said. Slavery was a universal curse of the human species, neither confined to one race nor to one country. Most people who were either slaves or slave owners around the world were neither white nor black. You would have to give reparations to more than half the entire population of the globe. I cannot get over the idea of apologizing for what someone who looks like me did to someone else who looks like him generations ago. We need to get past it and get to work. The failures of policy also extend to affirmative action. It harms everybody. There are black students who have all the qualifications to be successful in college, but nevertheless fail because they are systematically mismatched with institutions whose standards they don't need. When I was teaching at Cornell, the average black student scored at the 75th percentile, which is excellent. They would have been on the dean's list at most colleges. But the average liberal arts student at Cornell was in the 99th percentile. When you teach a class like that, you teach at a pace that most people of any race cannot keep up with. Cornell was taking very talented black kids and spending 4 years teaching them to feel inadequate, and succeeding at that. And the idea that these racial preferences are temporary is a powerful fallacy. In the case before the Supreme Court, Justice O'Connor said she expected the use of racial preferences would no longer be necessary in 25 years. I wrote a book called Affirmative Action Around the World. Not only did these programs in countries like Malaysia and Pakistan, which were set up with absolute cutoff dates, not expire, they increased and spread. The idea that you can control the future with wonderful-sounding words has never worked out anywhere. The solution relies on hard facts about lifestyle choices. The poverty rate among black married couples is 7.5%. That is not only better than blacks as a whole, it is better than whites as a whole. It is lifestyle choices. We also know the solution for education. Consider the charter schools. On statewide math tests, some elementary schools in Harlem have students passing at a higher rate than any fourth-grade kids anywhere in the state, including wealthy districts like Scarsdale. The Success Academy schools, whose student body is overwhelmingly black or Hispanic, have higher scores in both math and English than any public school district in the entire state of New York, despite having family incomes 4 to 9 times lower. They don't tolerate nonsense behavior, they stress hard work, and the kids succeed. And yet you see the political establishment in New York trying to shut down the expansion of these schools. Why? Because the teachers' unions, who are the major political force, look bad. This is one of the moral outrages, blocking the one thing that gives poor children a shot at a better life, simply to protect institutional turf. We have this happening in the present. We know how to do this.
Finally, consider the current political climate. You have young people flocking to socialism and figures like Bernie Sanders, even while people are literally starving in oil-rich Venezuela. Why this immunity to facts? Take the history of tax cuts. In the 1920s, the highest tax rate was cut from 73% to 24%. The textbooks decry this as a bonanza for the rich, but if you go look at the Internal Revenue data, you find that before the cuts, people making over $100,000 paid 30% of all the income taxes. After the so-called cuts for the rich, they paid 65% of all the taxes. People with ordinary incomes paid practically nothing. The facts simply do not matter. They use words like trickle-down or socialism, and it's like saying abracadabra. People become attached to a vision, and that really warps the way they see the human experience. Social visions have shown a remarkable ability to evade, suppress, or explain away discordant evidence.